Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Blade Runner 4, I and Talon by K.W. Jeter. Chapter 8. Two owls perched in the living room of her apartment, regarding her with their preternaturally golden eyes. Cross-check items in view, Iris spoke to the Ceresper, giving the machine its next commands. She had already ordered up its data-stored three-dimensional image of the owl, from when it had been recorded in the late Dr. Eldon Tyrell's office suite. Another few quick words had sized and placed the image next to the real living owl, its claws wrapped around a perch that Iris had improvised from a broom handle and the backs of a couple of chairs. Match for specific identity. The living owl, extracted less than an hour ago from the room above the downtown movie theater, hooted in mild alarm and ruffled its speckled brown feathers as the Ceresper played a shifting grid of bright green lines across its form. Iris watched the dance of the lines, waiting for the machine's verdict. She was alone in the room, except for the two owls, the real and the illusory. The real one had frightened the Shat even more than its previous recreation had, sending the small, prey-resembling artificial creature scuttling into the safety of the apartment's bedroom. "Check completed," announced the Ceresper, the grid of lines starting an inch or so apart, then narrowing down to map finer details, had disappeared from the living owl. Specific identity confirmed. Recorded and physically present items are same creature. Chronological back displacement estimated at 1 year. Probability estimate in plus 90% range. Identifying tally marks are as follows: texture, red, and mapped analysis of feather pattern. Striation of organic beak base material. Impact stress marks at edge and point of beak. Fibrous ocular patterning. Skip all that. Idiosyncratic heart and respiratory at rest impulses. I said skip it. The Ceresper fell silent. Iris regarded the two identity-matched owls, one framed by a small section of the opulently wood-paneled Tyrell Corporation headquarters, the other by the bare walls and window frame of her own apartment. "And recreation display," said Iris. The illusory owl vanished, along with its summoned-up surroundings. She was left alone with just the living creature in front of her. "Now, what do I do?" muttered Iris aloud. She turned and walked into the kitchen module, ignoring the chat cringing under the table, and poured herself a glass of water at the sink. The tap continued to run as she drained the glass in one gulp, head thrown back. Then she leaned forward, face lowered to the thin stream of water, and splashed it into her face. There were streaks of pinkish red swirling toward the drain when she took her hands away. Not her own blood, but that of the men in the room above the movie theater. Face still wet, she turned from the sink and regarded her leatherite jacket, which she had tossed across the kitchen's fold-down table when she had made her way back here to home. "That's bad enough," Iris spoke to no one else as she picked up the jacket by its collar and regarded the damage the bullets had done to it. "Christ," she said in disgust as she poked the fingers of her other hand through the rips and tatters underneath one sleeve and along the corresponding side seam. The jacket was a signature piece for her, as much as the collection of Repro cowboy shirts she'd always worn underneath it. She would have felt naked out on the streets of LA without it. Even worse, the cheap-ass LAPD didn't reimburse for in-field losses and damages like this. The only way Iris would have gotten any money out of the department, she knew from experience, would have been if the bullets had been an inch or two lower and closer to the center, and had left her flesh in bones splintered tatters as well. She had never been able to figure out exactly how much of a moral booster for the troops it was supposed to be, that the department was so willing, even eager, to splash out on funeral services, but not on incidental expenses along the way. Just irritating. She'd always considered the practice. She threw the jacket across the table again and leaned back against the sink, arms folded across her chest. The money thing irritated her to what she knew was an irrational extent. The jacket wasn't so much of a loss. She could always get another. But not one that had been so nicely broken in as this veteran, almost a second skin to her, except that she was also aware of how much she was in the hole on this job already. The extraction operation at the movie theater had gone well enough, in that both she and the owl had gotten out intact, and losing that weird Vogel character, whatever his personal agenda had been, was a bonus as well. But the material cost, all the expensive gear she had promised to return to Meyer, had been high. To really keep him clear with the departmental armory, she would have had to have retrieved the casing for the expended glare grenade, as well as the automatic rifle she'd laid on Vogel. Now she couldn't even call in one of the department's regular cleanup crews, who would normally have taken care of the messy details like that. The gear had come out of the LAPD armory's back door, via Meyer, and hadn't been authorized to be in her possession to begin with. The only way to have kept in the clear would have been to sneak the stuff back into the armory the way it had come out, without anyone knowing about its little excursion. She and Meyer both were in the deep shit. Meyer might be able to pull them out with his usual string-pulling expertise inside the department, but she would then be even further beholden to him than she had been before. And that was a situation definitely not to her liking. Which was why, she knew now, she had brought the owl here to her own place, rather than immediately getting it off her hands by taking it to Meyer at his office, either in the shiny new police station or the old abandoned one where he had given her this funky bird hunting job. She hadn't planned on doing that, either before she had gone to the theater hiding place with Vogel or immediately after, when she had been on her own again. Some instinct or half-formed rationale inside her head had turned her steps toward home, rather than going ahead and finishing the job, the easiest part of it, no matter how much she had thought she'd wanted to. She refilled the glass from the tap and carried it out to the apartment's living room, where she sourly regarded the owl on its improvised perch. "You cost me, sucker." Iris took a sip, then stepped over and refilled the dish she had put within reach of the owl. There had been enough left of the chain attached to the metal band on its foot that she had been able to secure the creature in place. The chat was already terrified of the intruder merely being in the apartment, if it had been free to swoop around with predatory intent toward anything smaller than itself. and reasonably alive seeming, the chat would probably have blown its circuits out of sheer panic. "I don't know how yet," said Iris, "but I know you did." The owl maintained its dignified silence, gazing back at her with its round, golden eyes. Iris looked down at the pinyin newspapers she had spread beneath the owl's perch. The papers were soaked wet around the base of the dish, blurring the vertical columns of Chinese ideograms. When she hadn't been watching, while she had been in the kitchen, the owl must have slaked its thirst. She wondered exactly how owls did that. Could they lap water up, the way real cats supposedly did? It raised another question, which had already been nagging at the back of her mind, about keeping the animal alive. "I suppose you gotta eat," said Iris. The owl blinked its golden eyes, but otherwise made no comment. She didn't have a fresh and real white rat to give to the creature. Little out of my budget, thought Iris. She was in the hole as it was with this job. Did owls eat only live kill, or was that snakes? A vague memory played through her mind, something she'd read, that real frogs and toads had eyes or circuits in their brains that could only recognize moving, buzzing around insects. A frog could be surrounded by mountains of tasty, nutritious dead flies and bugs, and starved to death because it couldn't tell they were there. "This thing should have come with a manual," groused Iris to herself. Either that, or she should have asked some questions of a more practical nature when she had been down at the animal trader's souk, or keep one of the men in the room above the movie theater alive long enough to have found out what they had been feeding the thing. "Let me see what I can find you." The owl blinked back at her. Iris left the apartment's front door open as she was only going to the end of the hallway. By the trash chute opening, the building's management had set out an array of traps for the scurrying brown mice that were a constant feature of life in LA. Another survivor species, like the pigeons that fouled the ledges and roofs of the older buildings. Underneath a bare light bulb swaying at the end of a frayed cord, Iris poked the toe of her boot through the traps, sorting out 3 that appeared to have been sprung recently. The blood spattered from the tiny corpses was still wet and shiny. Wrinkling her nose in distaste, she knelt down and pried open the traps, gingerly extracting the dead mice, their eyes like tiny black beads. She realized that she hadn't brought anything from the apartment to carry them with. When she stood up, she had a palmful of soft, dampish-feeling fur objects, their bare tails trailing over the side of her hand. "Try these," said Iris. She deposited the tiny corpses on the newspaper in front of the owl. As she turned away to relock the front door, she heard the powerful whap of the owl's wings against the air, and the scrape of its claws across the paper. She looked back and saw the owl disassembling one of the dead mice, the hook of its beak tearing through the flesh beneath the soft, grayish-brown fur. Either the owl didn't, by its own nature, reject food it hadn't killed itself, or maybe the late Dr. Tyrell had trained it that way. Maybe the living and expensive white rat she had witnessed in the Ceresper's data record had been a special treat. Even someone as rich as the head of the Tyrell Corporation wouldn't have been able to come up with goodies like that on a regular basis. Making progress, thought Iris, for the time being. At least The problem of keeping the owl alive was solved. There was enough vermin in the apartment building to feed the thing indefinitely, but she wasn't planning on keeping it that long in her possession. The owl was still desired by some powerful people and forces. The sooner she figured out what to do with it, and then proceed to get rid of the thing, the safer she'd be. "Get rid of it," echoed a tiny voice behind her. Iris looked down over her shoulder and saw the chat pressing close to her ankles. Looking around her shins at the feeding owl, the expression on the chat's round features was one of active hatred. "Can't just yet." Iris picked up the chat and held it to her with one forearm, careful not to stroke its endorphin-producing head. "Gotta think." "What's to think about?" The chat laid its tiny paws on her breast. "Icky!" "Couple of items." She walked the familiar circuit, back and forth in the apartment's living room, steering well clear of the owl. It had always helped sort out her thoughts. Speaking them aloud to the chat, it was one of the artificial creatures' useful functions for her. 1. I don't really know what Meyer's intentions are, at least as far as I'm concerned. "Who's Meyer?" "Nobody for you to worry about." A big worry for her, though. The whole job stank even more of a setup than it had before. Not good. Iris shook her head as she continued walking back and forth. The chat held closer to her. She'd had some residual measure of trust in Meyer before. No matter how much he jerked her around, even before this job, that was his job as head of the division, to hand out crap to all the Blade Runners, herself included. But not to get them killed, or at least not deliberately. A set-up like the one she could have found herself in, that amounted to a departmental execution as efficient as putting a gun's muzzle behind her ear and pulling the trigger. Hard to go on trusting anyone, even minimally, with an analysis like that. But what did he want? Iris mused over the question, taking one step after another, back and forth. "Who?" The chat peered up into her face. "Meyer." "Him again," said the chat, annoyed. It was the big question. Did he want the owl, thought Iris, or did he want to get me killed? Maybe both, though she wasn't sure how that would have worked out. But if her death had been Meyer's objective, then it would be suicide for her to go to the police station and hand over the owl. If the owl was in fact something that Meyer wanted, and not just a pretext to maneuver her into a situation where she'd get killed, then as soon as he had the damn thing, he'd have no reason to keep her alive. People got iced all the time inside police stations, cops included. The entrance to the building, either on street level or up on top where the spinners landed, was sometimes a one-way door, with no exit other than in a box. But those cops who got executed by the department were nearly always ones who'd screwed up big time, either by taking so many bribes from criminal types that the Internal Investigations Division had no choice but to get rid of them, or by reason of having run afoul of departmental politics, getting on the wrong side of one of the brass way above Meyer's rung on the ladder. Right offhand, she couldn't think of any reason why anybody up above would want to eliminate her. It's like being a replicant, thought Iris, or to be more exact, like a replicant who doesn't know that it's not human. She'd never had to retire one like that. At least, not yet. But she'd heard of a few cases where the poor bastards thought they were human, and then, as though they'd been dropped into a Kafka novel written by Mikey Spillane, found themselves being hunted down by some armed and legal nemesis figure like Iris herself. You wake up one day, it struck her, and somebody wants you dead, for no reason you've been told. She felt a twinge of pity, not only for herself, but for those replicants who got killed without even knowing why. "Screw it," Iris said aloud. She didn't care what the reason might be. She just wanted to stay alive. Again, like those poor bastard replicants, all of them, whether they knew what they were or not, she was starting to feel a little sympathy for them, which was a dangerous road for a Blade Runner to go down. First, mere sympathy, then empathy, the actual sensing and experiencing of another creature's sufferings. Iris couldn't figure how she'd be able to do her job if that happened to her. I'd have to give up being a cop, she thought, and go for being a saint. The way I see it, Iris told the chat, is that I've got a couple of options. Neither of them impressed her as very good. I could call up Meyer, and try to cut a deal with him. If he wants this owl, or if somebody above him does, then they're not getting it until I'm in the clear, meaning that I walk away after delivery and nobody tries to retire me. The chat hadn't understood what she had said, but nodded its round, bald head anyway. "Sounds good." "Only if you're an idiot," said Iris, "which I'm not, except to the extent I got myself roped into this mess in the first place. I already don't trust the guy. Why should I trust him about keeping a promise to let me live after I hand over the owl to him?" "Dunno." "Exactly. Besides, it might not be up to him. If he's merely the errand boy, following somebody else's orders, he could make all the promises in the world, have every intention of carrying them out, and I'd still get iced. He might too, but that wouldn't do me any good." "Gosh," the chat wrinkled its simple features in perplexity. "Doesn't sound nice." "You got that right, pal." Iris stopped pacing, nodding slowly to herself as she mulled over the various bleak possibilities in front of her. "Which leaves the other option." "Is?" Iris glanced over at the owl. "I try to figure out what's so important about our guest here." She pointed a thumb toward the creature. "And exactly why some people seem to want it so badly." "Yuck!" The chat scowled. "I don't. Get rid of it." "Wish I could." A sigh moved up from her heart. "You don't know how much I wish I could." This whole business, symbolized by the owl, had gotten way more complicated than she would have been able to imagine at the beginning. Her former life, in which all she had to do was track down and kill escaped replicants, now seemed like some vanished paradise, graced with an innocent and leisurely charm. But I'm stuck with it for the time being. "How long's that?" Something in the chat's question raised the skin prickling along her forearms. "What do you mean?" "You know." The chat pushed itself back from her chest, so it could look up at her full face. "Until something happens?" It tilted its round head to one side, small button eyes appearing slyer. "More guests?" Every once in a while, the chat's simpler brain circuits hit it right on the mark, catching something she had overlooked. Of course, thought Iris. The bass beneath her gut seemed to vanish. Something is going to happen, and soon. The guests would be coming, and their visit, while short, wasn't likely to be pleasant. Iris cursed her own stupidity, the amount of time she'd wasted fidgeting and fussing, right here where anybody looking for her would be sure to find her. And there would be people looking. Too many possible connections were hooked up between her and what had gone down in the room above the movie theater for her to have gotten away scot-free. Meyer had known that something was going to happen as soon as he delivered the gear from the armory to her. When she didn't get back to him within a reasonable amount of time, he'd start his own investigation. He might not know where the action had been, but to find out if she was still even alive, the first place he'd come looking would be right here at her apartment. The multiple coded locks on the door wouldn't slow him down by departmental regulation. Every cop had to log his or her code registry in the police station's personal database to facilitate surprise inspections for contraband and or ongoing drug usage violations. With his rank, Meyer would be able to pull those codes and come waltzing in here whenever he felt like it. And would he be happy to find the desired owl sitting here instead of having already been delivered to him at the station? Probably not. And he was smart enough to flash onto the simplest explanation for that non-delivery, which was that Iris no longer trusted him. In as nasty a situation as this one was shaping up to be, personal problems like that were likely to be solved by simple termination. Not from the job, but from one's life. And Meyer wasn't the only one she had to worry about dropping in on her unexpectedly. The armed and ugly men from whom she had lifted the owl had undoubtedly been working for somebody else. They'd had the Rottweilerish appearance of mercenaries, highly skilled and equipped ones, but still operating on somebody else's orders. Somebody who could very likely afford other hired thugs, who in turn would be able to do their job more efficiently than the last batch, as Iris would no longer have the element of surprise on her side. For all she knew, they were already on their way. The owl might have some kind of micro-seed tracer element planted or on it that she would have no way of detecting without using the through pulse scanners at the police station security labs. Her apartment could already be in the center of a glowing red circle on a track-in-progress screen, with other ominous red dots moving in on it. Shit! Iris pulled the chat off her and dropped it, squealing in protest, to the floor. She hurried to the kitchen module and pulled her damaged leatherite jacket off the shoulder holster she had previously draped across the fold-down table. From the holster, she extracted her gun. Its weight in her hands provided more comfort at the moment than all the chat's exudations could have. Iris walked back out into the apartment's living room with both hands wrapped around the gun's checked grip. Its muzzle pointed down but ready to be swung up at the first target to present itself. From its perch at the side of the room, the owl regarded her with round-eyed impassivity as she flattened her spine against the wall beside the window. She took one hand from the gun and spread the slatted blinds apart, enough to peer out through the barred window and down to the street below. Tendrils of active neon laced their reflections through the blue-black mirrors of the pavement. Slick with rain, a formation of nocturnal bicyclists, masked and shrouded, splashed through and disappeared in the distance, intent on their mysterious group errand or religious observation. Then the street was empty, except for the shades of her fears, unseen but sensed as they gathered close. "You're being an idiot," Iris told herself, "like they're going to come walking down the street and ring your bell in the building lobby. More likely, given the resources that the thugs' employers seem to have at their disposal, an unlicensed police-level spinner would land silently on the roof. The men with the guns would just as silently break through the access doors' locks. They would sift down through the stairwells and corridors like the unavoidable heat of an LA dry season Santa Ana wind. One you didn't know was coming until it hit you in the face and sucked the breath out of your lungs." A little voice spoke from down beside her ankles. "You're scaring me," said the chat in its tiniest seeming most fragile manner. It had rarely seen her gun inside the apartment, and never in her hand. Iris knew that the sight of the cold metal tended to upset the creature's delicately tuned sensibilities. "I'm sorry, sweetie." With her free hand, Iris scooped up the chat. She kissed it on its rounded brow, then set it back down on the floor. "But this is a work thing, okay? Not just for spookiness, so I gotta do it. Understand?" "No," the chat shook its head. "Don't." "You don't have to. Tell you what. Why don't you take your basket and pull it into the closet? Nap time. Nice and quiet and dark. You'll be happier that way." "No matter what happens," Iris told herself grimly. "Go on." She pointed to the foam-padded basket in the corner of the room. "Hop, hop." The chat continued to gaze up at her. "But what about you?" "Don't worry about me," said Iris. "I'll take care of that. You go bed down." She let her voice take on a stern edge. "Right now. Move it." Reluctantly, the chat did as ordered. When Iris was alone in the apartment's front room again, alone except for the owl blinking its round golden eyes, the source of all her recent troubles, she stilled her breath and heartbeat as far as possible, listening into the resultant silence for the slightest sound of intruders anywhere in the building. She heard nothing but the almost subliminal inhaling and exhaling of the structure itself, the mingled indicators of the living things dreaming or awake in the rest of its small rooms. Iris was so intent on listening, as though she had been transformed into one of the small creatures pursued through night forests by owls and other predators, that she jumped from sheer nerves when an already familiar voice spoke again. "Cuddle?" demanded the cat, demanded the chat. For Christ's sake! She had swung around with the gun clasped in both her hands, aiming it straight down toward the chat in the doorway to the apartment's bedroom. Her arms and shoulders detensed as she lowered the gun. "I told you to go into the closet and take a nap. I told you to go to the closet and take a nap. You're going to be in my way if you hang around here." "Will not," the chat said stubbornly. "I don't want you around, okay? That's an order." Iris had another reason for wanting the artificial creature to go to sleep. Her alternate plan swiftly coalescing in her thoughts, was to get out of the apartment entirely, taking the owl with her somehow and going on the run. Anywhere out on the streets would be preferably to a place where she could be tracked down so easily. Anywhere out on the streets would be preferable to a place where she could be tracked down so easily. If she did split, and that option seemed increasingly sensible to her, she didn't want the chat to pitch a fuss as she went out the door. Her hands would already be full with the owl bagged and tucked under her arm again, the way she had brought it to the apartment in the first place. Go! The chat shook its head. You need me. Iris let the gun dangle at her side as she gazed in exasperation at the small creature. Its persistence, cute at less pressing times, was seriously annoying her now. How do you figure that? Come on. The chat shifted its small weight from side to side, as though exhibiting its own impatience. You're stressed out, I can tell. Countering deleterious stress and its performance-degrading effects is why you got me. That's what I'm for. The creature had a point. It wasn't the same sort of mandatory equipment as her upgraded from standard issue Ceresper, but at the same time, she knew that a lot of cops, particularly those in the Blade Runner division, had artificial companions similar or identical to the chat in whatever places they called home. A highly recommended practice. A cop could get, if not a black mark, then a definitely gray in his personal folder from the departmental shrinks for not having a chat-like buddy on which to unload his griefs and tensions. Cop life was hard on normal human relationships. Marriages were rare, divorces frequent, domestic homicides common enough to have merited their own slang reference. At-home retirement. Chats and other substitutes for regular civilian-type social interaction had one big advantage over the human type, in that an artificial talking companion, if it got on one's frayed nerves too badly, could be eliminated without legal entanglements, which could be a satisfying, even therapeutic experience in its own way. There was still a dark scorch mark down by the baseboards of the apartment's living room wall, where this chat's immediate predecessor had exploded into nasty-smelling plastic shrapnel when Iris, grumpily exasperated by its small talk, had emptied her gun into its rounded belly. That had been before she had at least partially mastered her temper. She didn't go in for that kind of emotional catharsis anymore, even if legal. Chats made for expensive target practice. Your nerves are shot, continued the current chat. Shaky hands. You could get hurt. Don't worry about me. Iris tightened her grip on the gun hanging at her side. I'll be all right. Yeah? But what about me? The chat bobbed up and down in the kitchen doorway. This is a wicked universe we live in, full of bad things. Gotta protect the ones you love. It struck Iris that the situation must be as grim as she herself had perceived it to be. She had never heard the chat speak at such length before. What do you propose, buddy? Take one hit. The chat hurriedly waddled over to her and stretched up on its pudgy legs toward her free hand. It'll calm you down. Then you can shoot real straight. Get the bad guys. I promise you. She considered the small creature's offer. In its own way, it was exhibiting more bravery than she was, given how terrified it was of the owl perched on the other side of the room. Just a little, wheedled the chat. I'll tone it down. I will. Mild and sweet. Guaranteed to make you a better, more productive lethal agent. Come on, you know you want to. All right, jeez, said Iris, giving in. Nag. She reached down with her non-gun hand and laid her fingertips across the top of the chat's head, already shining with its chemical exudations. The jolt came up her arm like lightning, a straight shot to the top of her skull, where it exploded in white, glaring radiance, blinding and felling. The last sensation she had before her knees went liquid and buckled from beneath her was her fingers flaring out from each other, rigid and spastic, the gun's warmed black metal dropping away like an inert dead stone. A micro gap in consciousness ended when the side of her face struck the floor. Iris could feel her heart laboring inside her chest and could focus on the door at the other side of the room, but no more than that. Sparks danced outside her overloaded cortex as the vertical row of door locks melted through and gave way, one after another. A few points of light were still sizzling and dying from white to red, inches from her trembling, paralyzed hand as the door swung open. The still functioning parts of her brain expected several intruders to walk through, but instead, only one pair of dark-trousered legs were visible, striding unhurriedly toward where she lay prostrate. "Useful things," said an unfamiliar voice. Iris couldn't see the man's face. "If you know what's inside them." One hand and arm became visible, reaching down and picking up the chat from the floor. The creature was no longer active. Its button eyes were dull and gray, as though the charge it had delivered had also burnt out the delicate circuits inside. But you didn't. Not this one, at any rate. A ringer, thought Iris. The amused tone in the man's voice irritated her, but not enough to overcome the residual paralysis in her limbs. Somebody must have snuck it in. The man stepped over her. For a moment, Iris expected to feel something else. The smooth, circular business end of a gun's muzzle being placed behind her ear, which would have been the last thing she would have felt. That didn't happen. Instead, she heard a noise from the other side of the room, like small metal being snapped apart. Then the owl's hooting cry and muffled flap of its broad wings. "Thanks," came the man's voice once again. "I appreciate your hard work. You saved me a great deal of difficulty. Retrieving this valuable merchandise would not have been quite as easy for me as it apparently was for you." With a convulsive spasm of will, Iris managed to thrash herself onto her back. She had only a brief glimpse of the owl, snugged inside the soft bag in which she had brought it to the apartment, and nothing of the man's face before she found herself gazing up at the water-stained ceiling. "Who are you working for?" The words creaked and stumbled from Iris's dried mouth. "Who sent you?" "Do you really need to know?" A smile was audible in the man's soft voice. "Think about it. I've given you a little present, the most valuable one possible. Time. Think about what you need, because right now, you don't really know." Whatever time existed, there wasn't enough for her to try and ask another question. With her fingertips still quivering against the floor beside her, Iris heard the apartment's front door swing open, and then the footsteps of the man, carrying his prize with him, fading away in the corridor beyond.